December, beg your pardon. I thought I would do a little show today to clear up what seems to be a major misunderstanding within the independence community. There are, as you know, many groups of independence supporting activists, political parties, hubs and other organisations, countless numbers of these, which all support independence and are all campaigning for it in their own particular ways. But there has been a problem between two of these organisations, and I think many independence activists have become completely confused about which organisation is which. So just to clarify, we're talking about the two organisations known as Liberation Scotland and Liberate Scotland. Now, the two words are slightly different from each other. Liberation is generally talking about the entire topic of liberation for Scotland, whereas Liberate Scotland is a command to basically free the country. So if you look at them in those terms, they are pretty different. But which organisation is which? Because some people have been complaining that some commentary coming out of Liberate Scotland was actually made by Liberation Scotland, which is connected to Salvo. Now, just so that you know, when you can do a little check on Grok, if you're confused about this, Salvo and Liberation Scotland are linked together. Salvo is a campaigning and I would say historical arm of it, which does the research on the education of the people of Scotland, so they understand their own history and the context in which independence is being campaigned for. Whereas Liberation Scotland, which is linked to Salvo, is a campaigning organisation. It's non-party political. It is not linked to any political party whatsoever, and is a mass membership organisation which anyone can join if they wish. Now that brings me to Liberate Scotland, which, so far as I can see, and I've done a lot of searching all through social media and with various search engines and the AI systems to figure this out, Liberate Scotland is a party. They are standing candidates in the next Scottish general election. And they are campaigning on political issues, including obviously independence for Scotland, but on specific issues of interest to voters. And they are standing candidates, I believe at the moment, in the regional list, which is the second vote in our voting system for next year's general election. So that means they are not the same as Liberation Scotland, and they're not connected to Salvo. These two organisations do different things. Salvo Education, Liberation Scotland, which is linked to Salvo, is the mass membership organisation for people who are interested in campaigning for independence or are looking for further information. Whereas Liberate Scotland itself is a political party. It took that decision early on and decided to put up candidates for election. So the two organisations are different, and they have different ways of operating and with different aims, although the general aim of both is to achieve liberation for Scotland, to liberate the country from its colonised status. So, as if that's not complicated enough, there are other forms of the word liberate and Liberation Scotland which can be confusing. But these are the two main ones, and I want to make sure that you understand, first of all, that Salvo hasn't got any link at all to Liberate Scotland. Liberate Scotland is a separate political party, not linked to Salvo in any way. So if you have any complaints about anything which Liberate Scotland has said, you need to address it to them at Liberate Scotland, not Liberation. Liberation Scotland is a very different animal. It's much broader in its scope, because Liberation Scotland looks at the entire topic of liberation, from its history, its background, how the so-called union supposedly came about, why it isn't actually enforced, why it's not a legal entity in Scots law, why we don't have a king, and various other facts which you may not have been made aware of because of the media blackout on information like this in Scotland. Liberate Scotland is campaigning for a successful outcome in the next general election at Holyrood. Now, Liberate Scotland are very critical of the SNP. I think it's fair to say that in many cases that criticism has been warranted. But it's also much more noticeable in their campaigning because they're campaigning against the SNP. They're competing with them for your vote for an independence candidate at the next general election. Now, whether you vote for the SNP or for Liberate Scotland as a party is entirely up to you. However, it is a party, and I think it's worth remembering that. And when you make your choice in the ballot next year in May for the Scottish elections for Holyrood, it's worth bearing that in mind, that Liberate Scotland is a party. It's a party of independence, a party of liberation, which campaigns politically using political means, that means electing MSPs, in order to help gain independence for Scotland. There is nothing wrong with doing things that way. In the background, Liberation Scotland is campaigning for the education and the promotion of information about Scotland's current status. Now, Salvo and Liberation Scotland are the ones who have been pushing at the UN for Scotland's status as a nation to be changed from being a part of a voluntary union, i.e. in the UK, to being a colony, in other words, a non-self-governing territory. So they're really looking at the political angle from a legal and historical background and trying to fight the case at the UN. And I should mention to you at this point that no members of Salvo or Liberation Scotland are seeking election. None of them is campaigning for votes. They're all volunteers, they're all ordinary people like you and I, who have done the heavy lifting, researching the history and the origins of the so-called union, and then disseminated that information to the rest of us, because, let's face it, mainstream media is never going to tell you this stuff because they don't want you to know about it, because that would upset the whole UK apple cart. Liberate Scotland is campaigning to get elected in the next general elections for Holyrood. And I think if I'm taking an even stance here, I can understand why Liberate Scotland exists, because the SNP has largely had it all their own way for the last 3 general elections, because, as we all know, and as the mainstream media never tires of telling us, that the SNP is the only party that can gain this independence, or so we're told. The SNP likes to say this as well, and they would, because they're a political party and they're fighting their case for political re-election. And they'll be fighting against parties like Liberate Scotland, because Liberate Scotland is competing for those same seats. The SNP, incidentally, is far more likely to win a majority of the first vote and gain seats directly in that first vote. Whereas an organisation like Liberate Scotland, which is primarily standing candidates in the lists, and that means the regions, your second vote, is probably more likely to be more successful in that, because I don't think they're targeting the first votes because the SNP has such a stranglehold over them. It wouldn't be worth it. So the SNP may also be competing in the lists for the very same seats. So again, it's worth weighing that out before you put your cross in the second vote on in the general elections in May. Now, there's one other item of news today while you're picking over all of that stuff, and that is the secret fire at BBC Scotland. Now, this came to light yesterday across my news feeds when it turned out that an eagle-eyed independent supporter who was actually walking past BBC Scotland's Pacific Quay greenhouse, for want of a better word, noticed that there were several fire appliances there, and they had to put out a fire at the BBC. But I'll bet you any money this is probably the first time you've heard of this, because the BBC, which is a news-gathering television organisation, didn't think it worthy of putting in the main bulletin. So as far as Scotland's news was concerned, the BBC didn't catch fire. Fire wasn't put out by the fire brigade, even though many witnesses on social media have posted videos of exactly that happening. Now, I dare say the reason they didn't want to show this was they didn't want to give people ideas. I mean, let's face it, you don't want to encourage people to start setting fire to the BBC. That would be, well, pretty dangerous for a start, and I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that. But at the same time, why would you conceal the fact that your own television centre was on fire? That seems incredible in any organisation at all. There have been instances where television news programmes in other TV channels have been taken over by terrorists, and it's been reported. There have been things like fights off scene. These have been reported. It's incredible that the BBC failed to mention this in its news, that their own property was damaged by a fire, and the fire had to be put out by Strathclyde Fire Brigade. Now, if you don't believe me, I dare say that the Glasgow Fire Service, or Strathclyde Fire Brigade, Scottish Fire Brigade, whatever they call it now, will probably have a page which will show that. Certainly if you look for it on X, or you look for it on any search engine, you will find stories about a fire at Pacific Quay at the BBC in the last couple of days. But of course, that's mainstream media, that's British state broadcasting, and they don't want us to know that they're millions of pounds worth of big greenhouse with the huge dishes on the top and the vast BBC Scotland sign emblazoned on the sign spontaneously combusted. That would not do. I had posted a reply to somebody who showed me a video of this, saying, was it perhaps the reporter's trousers that caught fire after telling so many lies to the Scottish population? But we'll never know. The BBC is certainly not going to tell us, and I think unless somebody did a bit of digging and actually found out what caused the fire, then we'll never ever know. But it's a bit like living in Russia, where when bad news happens, it's immediately hushed up, and the viewers of the state broadcaster are never allowed to know the truth. So we're beginning to see the signs of living inside a totalitarian regime, which is definitely suppressing news, which would be damaging to itself and damaging to the colonising power, i.e. Westminster, here in Scotland. But I hope that nobody was hurt, and I definitely do not recommend anybody sets fire to anything at all, least of all television centres of any kind, because it's dangerous. People are going to get hurt, right? And it's not going to advance the cause if people do that sort of stuff. So this is a disclaimer from Inde-Car. Do not set fire to buildings. It's a crime, okay? Anyway, that's about it for me today, but I hope that my explanation of the differences between Liberation Scotland, which is linked to Salvo, which is the research and education and campaigning arm of the movement, and the mass movement organisation Liberation Scotland, and how that's different from Liberate Scotland, which is the party of independence, which is campaigning for seats at Holyrood next year. That's it from Inde-Car today. I'll be back again, I hope, next week, and I will definitely see you on Friday morning with Norrie Hunter at 9:30 for Hodmajaket, which incidentally, a little bird tells me that at a recent meeting in the Highlands, both Norrie Hunter and Roddy from Prism were both present in the audience, and several audience members, basically unprompted by anybody, came up to congratulate Norrie on the success of the Hodmajaket programme. I'm not sure how Roddy felt about that, but I have to remember that Roddy is on our side. We're not competing with Prism. Prism is a different type of show. It's a podcast with multiple guests, something which we don't do, which looks at specific political questions and issues. It asks its guests for their opinions. And that is as worthy as any other channel in the independence movement. So, Roddy, if you're listening and watching the programme, good luck to Prism. Keep it going. Don't be discouraged. Our success is at a different level. We operate in a different area. We look at Scottish culture, we look at music, we look at sport, we look at the positives in the Scottish news, and we also look at some, but not all, of the silly stuff that comes out of the British state. But we're not aiming to compete with Roddy, and I hope to goodness, Roddy, if you're listening, that you take this the way it's meant. We coexist, but we're operating in different spheres. So good luck to Prism, and from Inde-Car today, that's it from me, and I'll see you again later on in the week, probably, Friday morning, 9:30 for Hodmajaket. But in the meantime, keep the faith. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.